Unbelievable, Edward Snowden confirms the breakthrough of Bitcoin, or should I say, the breakout. He's discussing Bitcoin's decentralization and its resilience. He warns against altcoins, emphasizing Bitcoin's essential decentralization. Bitcoin is now very hard to eliminate due to its breakthrough. He also mentions Donald Trump's pro-Bitcoin stance and the Bitcoin community's support. You can't get rid of it now because it has really made its breakthrough here. He discussed current developments, noting Donald Trump's pro-Bitcoin stance and the Bitcoin community's support. He believes it's beneficial for Bitcoin but warns of potential risks. Due to Trump's frequent nonsensical remarks, he is direct and doesn't sugarcoat his views. He emphasizes the importance of privacy amidst the Bitcoin hype, ETFs, and KYC issues. He clarifies that Bitcoin isn't private by default. It's pseudonymous, not anonymous, and ideally, money should be completely anonymous. And he also says that with the whole Bitcoin pump story that is currently going on here, one should not lose focus on privacy, because everything that is currently happening here with ETFs, with MicroStrategy and so on, the whole KYC story and so on that is going on here, of course one also has to keep an eye on. But in this case, it wasn't really about the whole privacy issue that Edward Snowden usually talks about. He simply states that Bitcoin is not private by default, so it's not anonymous money. It's pseudonymous money, and ideally, money should be completely anonymous. But that is ultimately the big problem that Edward Snowden always talks about and has been preaching about at every Bitcoin conference for years, saying, hey, be careful, Bitcoin is not anonymous, and that will eventually lead to very, very big problems here with Bitcoin. But that wasn't really the focus here. It was more about the breakthrough that Bitcoin has achieved. And let's listen in on Edward Snowden's current statements.
Crypto has been leaning towards centralization since the start, because there are benefits to be gained during the good times. Centralization is an advantage. It's only in tough times that you see the benefits of decentralization. I mean, everyone in this room who's really followed Bitcoin from the start knows that if Bitcoin hadn't been decentralized, it wouldn't be around today. It would have been wiped out, and everyone involved would have been arrested. It would have been a news story 10 years ago, just like Liberty Reserve and all those other alternative currency setups, when it started to pose a threat to what was seen as the government's monopoly on its powers. The boot would have come down hard, and it would have been stopped cold with AI. They didn't start it. This is a power that they have.
And there are so many important statements contained here. So first of all, talk about the fact that crypto has a tendency to centralize. We see that, for example, somehow some people leave their coins on exchanges or something like that. And of course, there are honeypots here. Of course, there are also honeypots with Bitcoin Idachi. With the ETFs, there's a honeypot at Coinbase, and other custodial services might have potential honeypots too. He points out that this tendency towards centralization only happens in crypto, while Bitcoin has strong decentralization. He also clearly mentions that, in the end, centralized things are much, much more efficient. So, in most cases, it doesn't even make sense to have a decentralized blockchain. It's usually much better to just have a central ledger. That's why all those shitcoin applications that make all these promises about being ultra-efficient or whatever don't really make sense for them to have a blockchain if they don't really have any true decentralization. If there are foundations, leaders, or organizations behind them, they could just be straightforward and say, hey, we have some tech, like a fintech company or something, we're doing an IPO trying to raise a couple $1,000, but we don't really have decentralized technology because that's something only Bitcoin has. And then they could also be open about the fact that they're a centralized company, a central coin, and the difference is that Bitcoin is not a central coin, it's a decentralized coin. All the other coins promise decentralization, but there's actually very little decentralization behind them. And usually, centralization isn't a problem, as he mentions here. And then you can also talk openly about the fact that we're a centralized company, a central coin, and that's the difference with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not a central coin, it's a decentralized coin. Decentralization is often overlooked until crises hit, like Bitcoin attacks or China mining bans, when it becomes crucial. But in tough times, during crises, when Bitcoin is under attack, when there's a China mining ban, or when any of those kinds of stories come up, that's when decentralization really matters a lot. And you could see that at the beginning. In the beginning, Bitcoin could have been easily wiped out. The hash rate wasn't that high back then, and the decentralization of the Bitcoin network probably wasn't as strong either. By now, we have a super decentralized network. Of course, there are some minor criticisms, maybe regarding the miners, the mining pools, and so on. We can talk about that. It's a different topic, and we don't need to get into it today. But generally, we have a level of decentralization here that we don't see in any other technology. Bitcoin's attacks made it stronger. Decentralization means slower transactions. Every time people thought, okay, now it's getting critical, Bitcoin won't survive this, Bitcoin ended up coming out of it even stronger because it's just decentralized. That means it also brings a lot of downsides, like the fact that we don't have super fast transactions on the blockchain. We can't settle that quickly because it's just not possible to pack an infinite number of transactions into a block, and the blocks have a relatively long time gap between them. And that ensures that anyone can run a node, so anyone can host their own point in the Bitcoin network right at home because the blockchain size is relatively small. And that's not the case with other cryptocurrencies. They promise, okay, hey, in our cryptocurrency, we have I don't know how many billions of transactions with zero fees, and the block time is shorter, the block size is smaller, and the time gap between the different blocks is also smaller. And then people are just sold on the idea that, hey, we have a much faster Bitcoin. What is forgotten here, however, is that decentralization suffers here. And yeah, when things are going well, everything's rising, the market's up, and so on, then it might work even without super strong decentralization. He discusses Solana later and makes it clear that Solana is not a decentralized project. The Solana blockchain fails 3 or 4 times a year. It's a stretch to call it decentralized when the blockchain crashes 3 or 4 times and they restart the blockchain, etc. That doesn't happen with Bitcoin. I mean, it's kind of a stretch to think you have a decentralized project when the blockchain crashes 3 or 4 times and then they just stop everything and restart the blockchain or something. You definitely don't see that with Bitcoin. In the beginning, there were a couple of small hiccups where the Bitcoin blockchain would pause for a bit. I think it was in 2012 or 2011 or something like that. So that's why Bitcoin's uptime isn't 100%, but rather 99.9999%, because there were times when the Bitcoin blockchain was down for several minutes, or I think it was even an hour or an hour and a half or something like that. There were some small bugs that needed fixing, but those have been taken care of by now. Since then, since 2012 or 2013, there have been almost, if not absolutely, no problems on the Bitcoin blockchain. And that's the difference where Edward Snowden really warns about between Bitcoin and the altcoins. And here he also explicitly mentions Solana. What's interesting is that Edward Snowden is a guest at a shitcoin conference. I don't even remember anymore. Hold on. I need to check what the token was called that he was a guest for. And that was the Near protocol. It's pretty interesting that they invited Edward Snowden to a shitcoin conference. I don't want to say that, or everyone has to make up their own mind about whether Near protocol is a shitcoin or not. Just like Solana or whatever. From my perspective, it's a shitcoin because it just doesn't have the same level of decentralization as Bitcoin. Edward Snowden makes it very clear that you can't compare Solana to him. Do you want to say something too? Hello. How's it going? Greetings from the pool in El Salvador. Definitely, that's what you need to differentiate, and it's really important because when Bitcoin is pumping, it's always going to be the case that other coins will follow, for example. Then a lot of people say, okay, 200% a year isn't enough for me anymore. I want Solana now. I want to get into all these coins I don't even know. Sway, right? Sway is getting a lot of hype right now, or even Ripple is suddenly being hyped again. Then a lot of people say, okay, 200% a year isn't enough for me anymore. I want Solana now. I want to get into all these coins I don't even know. Sway, right? Sway is getting a lot of hype right now, or even Ripple is suddenly being hyped again. Yeah, okay, Bitcoin 200, 300%, cool, but I want that percent I want. Sway, exactly, Sway is getting a lot of hype right now, or even Ripple is suddenly being hyped again. Yeah, okay, Bitcoin 200, 300%, cool, but I want that percent I want. And then there are a ton of promises from all these altcoins that say, okay, my coin is faster, my coin is better, my coin can make even more returns, and so on. And yeah, that happens when things are going up. Edward Snowden says centralization is fine in bull markets, but warns of corrections when it ends. Bitcoin saw corrections in 2011, and altcoins may drop 90% plus. Expect volatility. Invest in altcoins for high-risk gains, but they often lack decentralization and use cases. We've had corrections of 70, 80% in some cases, but altcoins have had corrections of 90, 99, 95% in some cases, and you just have to be prepared for that. Yeah, I'm not saying don't invest in altcoins. You can do it even for gambling if you want to chase alpha and outperform Bitcoin, then you can bet on altcoins. But be warned, altcoins don't have the decentralization they promise, and we're making a speculative bet on something that often lacks a real use case. I don't want to dissuade you, but be cautious. I see this altcoin bull run might not be as intense as past ones due to institutional capital, and I don't want to talk you out of it, but just be a little cautious. Those are the words of Edward Snowden. I'm just passing that along, and I can definitely back up what Edward Snowden is ultimately criticizing. I could also imagine that this bull run, the altcoin run, might not be as intense as in past bull runs because now we have all this institutional capital, and I've never heard anything like that, for example. Now MicroStrategy has, now Allianz has, for example. MicroStrategy bought convertible bonds, and I've never heard that they're suddenly buying Solana or Sway or XRP or whatever. They're all betting on Bitcoin, of course. The Ethereum ETF is also not as pumped as, for example, the Bitcoin ETF and, for example, BlackRock or the big asset managers. If you ask them, you will hear that the customer interest here is primarily in Bitcoin and not some shitcoin ETFs and so on. So, of course, there will be an altcoin phase in this run too. but I can definitely see it being a bit toned down. But it could also be that I'm completely wrong here. It could be that altcoins go to the moon again, and then all those people come out saying, hey, look at my portfolio, I made 500x. And the price is always what blinds people. So you might have those 500% gains, but you forget that the decentralization isn't there, that the security isn't there, that there are really central points of attack, and eventually there will be correction phases where altcoins get massively wiped out. And that's basically just the message of today's video. But feel free to drop a comment down below. I'm open to discussions if someone says, okay, hey, they're using, for example, gambling with shitcoins and trying to outperform Bitcoin to accumulate more Bitcoin or something like that. That's totally fine. Just be aware of the risks. And that's basically all I wanted to say. I'm signing off from the pool. The kids are having a blast over here. Subscribe to Bitcoin Hotel. Yeah, subscribe, exactly. All right, folks, see you later. Bye.